Um, Thank you both for joining the show. It's a pleasure to have both of you on here today. Lots to get into and talk about the events this weekend and the somewhat unhinged reaction to the NDP convention and Avi Lewis's election as NDP leader that we could get into today. So thank you to you both. You just want to briefly say hello, introduce yourselves to everybody who's tuning in.
Will you start, Cam? You were here before me.
Yeah, I'm a journalist in this world of ours. I'm not working anywhere right now, which sadly is the case for many journalists. I said on Jeremy's stream the other day, he was like, "Where can we find you?" And I was like, "The unemployment line." So I'm here just doing streams and hanging out. But I was able to go to the convention and hang out with Jeremy and with Nora Loretto and with Andre Goulet and a couple others. But Jeremy was there working and doing some great work and some very prolific coverage.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
taking care of business and working overtime.
Just like
Yeah,
the
I'm
song
Jeremy.
says.
Yeah, that's right. That's the best part. I'm Jeremy Appel. I think Cam did a much better job introducing me than I'm about to. I'm a journalist based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Um, yeah, and also just got back from the NDP convention. It was a lot of fun. And it was very, the only other political convention I had covered prior to this was the UCP, which is the ruling party here in Alberta, led by the very charismatic and somewhat likable Danielle Smith, who is a
A little
whack
bit of a
job.
different vibe, I imagine.
Yeah, very different vibe. Um, yeah, got stopped in the halls by a lot of people who like recognized me and told me they love my work. Which yeah, wasn't happening at the UCP convention. Um, where we were sort of just like it was more of like a journalistic networking opportunity. Though I did meet some interesting people for sure covering the UCP who don't share my political ideology. Cam, I don't. Yeah, actually, one of the streams Nora and I and Cam did, I don't think it was at the same time. I think it was me, Cam, and Roberta Lexier, and then Cam left, Nora hopped on, and then Roberta left, and Raheem Mohammed of the National Post, we got him to come on our stream, which was interesting. He's like he was a columnist at the National Post, so we all know what you think, very right wing guy. Um, Now he's a reporter, and he's reporting. I think they had him like assigned to the NDP leadership race, and his reporting on it was not bad. I mean, it's the National Post, obviously has a bit of a slant, but it was, I think his reporting on it has been fair. And yeah, Nora and I hung out with him a bunch. He's a nice guy. A lot of these right wingers, on an interpersonal level, um, are quite nice. And um that was a whole interest. Yeah, and I could sort of relate to him because he was sort of like me at the UCP convention where I'm this like fish out of water. That was sort of him at the NDP convention. And yeah, I got some swag, a bunch of mostly Avi Lewis buttons. Um there was one made by some supporters of his in Guelph, that had like the Lewis logo and like the color palette, and it says on it, "Vote for Naomi's husband." Actually, here let me pull it off my pin to show the audience.
Tell them about the nurses union chocolate as well.
Oh yeah, that was the best swag. So the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions were going around handing out these chocolate bars that were incredible. Incredible. It was like caramel, but like the pieces were like perfect squares. And I must have had like four of them in like 3 days of convention. They just had so many. Um and yeah, that was probably the best piece of swag. Delicious chocolate bars. Um
Yeah, if people
and
know the red lint bars, the sometimes you get them in the store, the red lint bars with like a kind of a softer layer in the middle. It
Okay.
was like those. It was basically like those, but from the nurses union.
And then you develop health issues from eating all the chocolate, and then you have to go to see a health professional, and the nurses benefit. So that's why it's smart for them to be giving this out.
yeah, I forget there was like a slogan written on the chocolate bars that sort of played on like um that played on that. I can't recall what it was though. But yeah, exactly. It's all part of the plot, and then they can get higher wages because they're like
Yeah,
all these
perfect.
people are eating this chocolate. It's yeah, those mafia tactics in the nurses union.
Well, listen, I am really interested in hearing more from both of you about your experience at this convention and what the vibes were. It's interesting because I think if you look at like the federal NDP for the last 10, 15 years, there hasn't been this like huge cause for celebration or to feel good or to have, for anything like that. So it seems like from what I see, the atmosphere right now around the federal NDP and the convention seemed to be a little bit different from what we're maybe used to seeing. Like, was that your feeling being there? Like, how was it?
Yeah, I mean the short answer is definitely there was a lot of buzz, there was a lot of excitement. I mean, I made the decision pretty early in the leadership race. I was sort of mulling over joining the party to vote. And being transparent with my readers about that and writing something explaining why I was doing so. I made a call not to do that, which I don't regret, to have some distance between myself and the leadership race, some critical detachment.
Sure.
I of course don't. I know Luke Savage did what essentially I was thinking of doing, and I certainly don't hold that against him at all. Of course, Luke has a sort of, I mean, Luke co-authored a book with Ed Broadbent, the great former NDP leader. I believe he's ran for the NDP before, right? So he's always been like closer to the party than I have been. Martin Lukash from the Breach who's a close friend of Avi's, was helping him with policy on the campaign. Um, um, but yeah, I felt it would be better if there was some detachment for it in for me, but I say that only to say I couldn't help but feel like excitement and like hope for the first time that I can think of in my adult life regarding Canadian politics that and I do, and I know Avi. I mean, I would say he's a friend, not a close friend, but like I knew him before he was running for leader, and we've had some good conversations. Um, and I'm happy for him. Of course, his dad, Stephen Lewis, the broadly respected former leader of the Ontario NDP and ambassador to the United Nations under a conservative government in the 80s, passed away like 2 days later. So I can only
Yeah.
imagine the emotional whirlwind that family's been through.
It's a roller coaster. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I felt hope. And our mutual friend Nora, has been very cynical, I think, about the Lewis campaign. So whenever I'm feeling too optimistic,
Yeah.
I would just talk to Nora about it, and she would give me reasons to be skeptical, if not cynical, of the Lewis campaign. I mean, this is an experiment for sure, because I think what Lewis represents is this sort of effort to fuse social movement politics that his wife really made a name for herself writing about with no logo, that he's always been a part of, and sort of electoral politics, which we've seen elsewhere, right? With Jeremy Corbyn, Bernie Sanders, Mamdani, of course, most famously, and you can tell by the design of Lewis's campaign materials that there was a clear influence from the Zoran campaign, aesthetically. Also, the way Avi has been responding to his critics, I would say, in keeping things very positive as a lot of mud was hurled at him. Um, would also, I think, be an influence of Mamdani, but we don't want to be too charmed, right? We've got to be critical, and we've got to hold him to account, right? And push him to do what he said he would do. But it feels good to have someone at the helm of Canada's left-leaning party, that for too long has been a nominally left-leaning party, and have someone who is at least rhetorically unapologetically leftist um, in charge. One last thing, and then I'll let Cam speak. Um, is that more I mean, it was quite clear Lewis was going to win. He was going to win on the first ballot. That wasn't really close, right? He almost got double the amount of votes as the runner-up Heather McPherson, who was my MP until I was redistricted out of her riding in time for the last election. Very good MP, very good voice for the Palestinians in Canadian Parliament. I would argue perhaps the most effective voice ever in Canadian Parliament for the cause of Palestinian human rights. But more surprisingly was on the day before the leadership results were announced. So on the second day of convention, the Saturday, was the election for the party's executive, right? That is in charge of sort of the internal machinery of the party. So a lot of people don't really pay attention to that because most people aren't members of any political party, and most people are members of a political party, aren't a member of the NDP. But there was basically a slate that was Lewis adjacent. You had that was sort of the change slate, and then you had the sort of establishment slate. The party president wasn't seeking re-election, which I think was wise given the humiliating defeat the party received in the last election. But their VP, their treasurer candidate, and the slate's presidential candidate were both defeated by the Lewis aligned slate. And then under the party rules, if the president is a francophone, the vice president has to be an anglophone. And because the Lewis aligned president now, a fellow by the name of Niall Ricardo, who, like Avi Lewis and myself, is a member of Independent Jewish Voices. Um, the in the establishment candidate for vice president, who's the incumbent, is a francophone. It automatically went to Libby Davies, who's an anglophone, who was the Lewis aligned candidate. And unlike the other people on that slate, which was also now treasurer Keir Gunn from Calgary, um, she was an MP for a long time, so it was kind of interesting that this change slate included someone who um was a longtime member of parliament under the NDP. But yeah, them sweeping the executive was not expected, because the sort of establishment slate was backed by all the organized labor bigwigs. Suzanne Skidmore, their treasury candidate, or the incumbent treasurer, is the president of the BC Federation of Labor, for example. And they're endorsed by the Canadian Labor Congress, QP, National, and yeah, so that was a big defeat for the party establishment, and that's going to make Lewis's life a lot easier, and because he won't be undermined by the party, at least the official party machinery. Of course, there are influential figures within the party who are entrenched. It might not have a formal role that are, I'm sure, going to try and undermine him. But the fact that the party president, treasurer, and vice president are, um, uh, you know, aligned with Lewis
Yeah.
does help him. And that was actually the big upset of the weekend, because you didn't hear a lot about this slate until pretty close to convention.
Yeah, and it seems like
Yeah,
the
it was
writing was
announced
kind of on the
very
wall
last minute.
once that happened.
Yeah,
Um,
it was like, okay, Lewis is going to win. I thought you would actually get a bit higher support, like more like 2/3, but he got 56%, which, again, winning on the first ballot is decisive. But again, you look at Naheed Nenshi, who I'm sure we're going to talk about in a
yeah, we'll get
bit,
into
the
that.
Alberta NDP leader, who I'm pretty sure never voted NDP in his life before the last provincial election in Alberta. And certain has never voted federal NDP. Um, he actually, the more people voted in the last Alberta NDP leadership race than the current federal NDP leadership race, and then she got 85% of the vote. Um, Carney also in the Liberal leadership race, which I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would imagine had far more participants than this one, also got 85% of the vote. So, I mean, there was a substantial chunk of the party that Lewis wasn't their first choice. Though I just saw Eric Grenier, the pollster on Substack. It's He got the sort of breakdown by campaign, sort of who ranked who second and stuff. And the actual numbers are paywalled, but he gives you the gist of it. And that actually Lewis also had the most second place support from uh all the other candidates, including surprisingly Heather McPherson, who's, at least her prominent supporters were the most anti-AVI people.
Okay, well, there you touched on a lot of things there, and there's certainly more to get into there. But yeah, I would like to hear from Cam about your experience at the convention and how you've been feeling, how the vibes were, and after this weekend, how you're feeling about the prospects of the federal NDP into this kind of new direction.
Yeah, I think similar to Jeremy, I was surprised that the slate that was announced so late was so successful. I know that Nora had been concerned about that. That, why hasn't Lewis been pushing a slate alongside him throughout the whole campaign? Because so much of his promise to his voters would be that there would be change brought to the internal party machinery, essentially. And until a couple days before the actual vote, people had generally not heard of this slate that, again, has said it's not the Lewis slate, but is certainly in his corner. Libby Davies, who was elected, as Jeremy talked about, as VP, was a speaker at Lewis's rally a couple days before, which I went to check out. That was before a few people got into town for the convention. So I thought it'd be useful to go and kind of see what that was out, kind of hang around the back and get a sense of it. Did get a bit of a preview of his speech on the convention floor, which we can probably talk about in a second. At that rally, he was kind of workshopping it. He only spoke for a brief period of time. It was mostly surrogates of various kinds, kind of more of a rap party for his supporters and campaign team than necessarily a like get out the vote final push. But it was really led and emceed by Leah Gazan, the Winnipeg Centre MP, one of the few remaining NDP MPs, and she acquitted herself really well, I thought. Very personable, articulating a lot of the same politics and specifically politics of
Yeah.
care and organizing together that AVI has espoused. I am curious, and we can get into it later, what happens with the federal parliamentary caucus of the NDP. You don't get the sense, at least right now, and maybe Jeremy knows more than I do, that Lewis will run in any of the upcoming by-elections. There's suspicion quite heavily that Boularice, the NDP MP in the last remaining one in Quebec, will resign sooner than later to become involved in provincial politics. So there would be that seat. There would be Toronto Beaches because Nathaniel Erskine Smith is resigning, and he'll seek the nomination for the Ontario Liberals. So yeah, there would be opportunities for Lewis to get into Parliament. I don't think he'll attempt those. I don't think he would be successful if he did attempt those. So the question becomes which of the remaining MPs will push his agenda in Parliament while he kind of takes some time to rebuild nationally. And he, yeah, someone in the comment has said he said no to running. I'm not sure he ruled it out completely explicitly. He was kind of cagey, but he definitely gave the impression that he was not going to be baited into attempting to hold a seat for the sake of it. And I think that was savvy because you obviously don't want to open your tenure with what would likely be a defeat. But we should probably save that for later. I think there's a bit more to get into there in terms of the specific ridings, his long-term strategy, the organizing strategy, some of the indications he gave about that. But yeah, I'll throw it back to Jeremy actually to ask what you thought about specifically the speech that Lewis gave, which I can talk a little bit on in a moment. I recorded it. I'm sure it's up there somewhere. But yeah, it spoke to a lot of things that folks like us would be concerned about and gave a lot of indications of how he plans to direct the party and specifically to direct his own messaging in the media, which he did some of in the ensuing days. But I gotta charge up my computer for about 5 minutes. So Jeremy, if you can ramble for a little while, that'd be great.
Oh, that's my specialty. But just when you're saying, okay, I wasn't sure if he was referring to the speech Lewis gave at his victory party or the speech he gave at his at the convention.
Let's say the convention speech.
Right, because the victory, they're very different. But before I do that, just because we were talking about Lewis seeking a seat, I thought he was going to go for Beaches East York, because that is a seat that has been held by the NDP before. Nate Erskine Smith, while a Liberal, I think is definitely as left wing as it gets for a Liberal, and I think Lewis could win there, and the polls suggested he could, but it looks like he doesn't want to risk losing again because he's ran twice now for the federal party and not just lost but come in third. So it does seem like in his sort of first press conference the day after the convention, which had brutal audio, like it made my ears like hurt, but anyways, that's not his fault. It was, I think he did quite well at the press conference. But one of the things he made clear was that he's not interested in seeking a seat for now, and that the caucus is in agreement that now's not the time. I think that makes sense. I think Heather McPherson needs to maybe teach him a bit, give him some tips on how to win a seat, because she is the most popular New Democrat MP in Canada, in terms of the vote percentage. Um, um, and she knows how to win in a place that might not be now Edmonton Strathcona. I mean, it's also it was Rachel Notley's riding provincially, or at least part of it was Rachel Notley's riding provincially. Now it's Naheed Nenshi's riding, until I presume he runs in Calgary in the provincial election. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if, because the caucus is so small and because they don't have official party status, having one other MP, that's if he wins, because if he loses, he's done.
Yeah, that would be not a great start.
Yeah. So you don't want to be like John Tory as Ontario PC leader, right? And because they don't have any seats on committees, which doesn't mean that they can't go to committee and speak at committees. I know Leah Gizan has been very diligent, especially on the Building Canada Act, in showing up to committee and trying to get amendments. But yeah, I mean, there's no use having their leader. It makes more sense to actually have Lewis outside of Parliament, touring the country and sort of building his movement.
Yeah.
That he's trying to sort of fuse with this electoral party, while McPherson, I think, would be a great House leader, deputy leader, or whatever the official position is. I think she's a great parliamentarian. And I know Lewis is keen to work with her. I don't sense that she's very fond of Lewis. She was actually on my flight back home to Edmonton. And I talked to her briefly as I was going to my seat, and she seemed pretty at peace with the results, but I have gotten the sense that she's not a fan of Lewis personally.
I can imagine it would be a little bit frustrating to be in that position.
Right, because you worked your ass off, like, making your seat the safest NDP seat in Canada, and then someone who can't get elected to Parliament swoops in and beats you by a lot in the leadership race, right? So I do think that, and Avi's been planning this for like a decade, right?
Yeah,
and that's no secret.
No, I know.
And but I think they, honestly, really, the only distance between them is on oil and gas and energy, and even on that, McPherson, I don't think is quite the pro-oil caricature that some of Lewis's supporters have made her out to be. I mean, her husband is a lawyer for Enbridge, so there is a material interest there and conflict of interest, which she's disclosed and been transparent about. But again, she supports transition, just on maybe a slower timeline than Avi would like. So I think they can still work together on that. But to answer the original question,
and just like to what you were saying earlier about the cynicism, and we're definitely gonna get into like the Western NDP and the oil and gas industry and this kind of conflict that we see kind of developing here. But to what you were saying earlier about like the sort of cynicism that some people have, like you can always count on Nora to throw an ice cold bucket of water over anyone starting to feel too good about something.
And that's why we love her.
Exactly. No, absolutely. No, but that's the thing. It's like, I don't think anyone would say, oh, no, we did it. We won. Now Avi Lewis is the leader of the NDP. We can just dust our hands off. The job's finished and we can just kind of go home and everything's going to be, he's going to come and save us now. I don't think anyone believes that. But I think if it's been something that you've thought about over the last, 10, 15 plus years, about the kind of direction that you would like to see the NDP going in. I know in these conversations in like the left in Canada, on media and everything, this is a common topic of discussion, and this sense of frustration that people have had with the party over what feels really like kind of a lost decade now, of the last 10 years, especially of the Jagmeet Singh era. It's just, no one thinks that all our problems are fixed now. But if your position should be like the NDP should go back to these more social democratic roots, have someone that's more of an unapologetic left wing figure at the head of the party, stop trying to do this kind of like consultant driven triangulation politics, you can be encouraged in this moment, because it seems like this seems to be the feeling that Avi and the people around him have. They have the same sense of frustration. And if you view that as being kind of like one plank in an overall strategy that involves a lot of other moving parts to maybe enact a little bit more of a progressive society in this country, or roll back some of the gains that neoliberalism has made over the last several years, you should probably view that as at least a positive step in the right direction, without getting too out of control with your hope and praise for what's been happening. Does that reasonable? I think a reasonable take.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was a lot of people in our circles take coming out of the convention. I think that, and this is something I think I might have said on the other stream, but there's often and understandably a view that electoralism is kind of this obviously site we need to be wary of, but where we kind of go to try and run in there and get a policy entrenched and then run back to grassroots organizing and kind of real politics, which I don't disagree with. But I think we also need to be conscious of the opportunity going almost the other direction, where electoral politics has the ability, if used correctly, to be kind of a part of the PR apparatus for kind of rooted left politics. And I think this is a benefit of Lewis being leader, not only having further left positions than the NDP has had over the past however long, basically this centrist shift that dates back to Leighton, but was sellable under Leighton because of his personal charisma, and less so under, say, Mulcair because of his lack of personal charisma.
And he's, of course, coming out of the woodwork, tisking this whole situation as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of I think that kind of shows part of the issue, is that when you have these kind of managerial liberal light NDP politicians, you have faithlessness. You have faithlessness from those politicians themselves and from the voters. Because if the NDP is just a replacement for the Liberals that waits in the wings and is a little bit more feel good, then as we saw, the Liberals can simply switch streams, switch leaders, switch messaging, and claim that territory. Or you'll have people who might not switch all the way to the Liberals, but can easily break faith with the NDP over whatever. And I think there are a lot of good and reasonable reasons to break faith with the NDP, but obviously strategically, the NDP needs to entrench a bit firmer of a base of support. But to what I was saying a second ago, I think, and this was the appeal, for instance, of Lascaris running 6 or 7 years ago now, would be for the Greens.
Yeah.
Is that it's not like we're going to throw all our electoral hopes behind the Green Party necessarily. It's that there's a utility to having someone with unabashed left politics, pro-Palestine politics in his case, especially at that time, given a national mouthpiece in leadership debates federally, in the federal election period, which is when most of the population pays any attention to federal level politics, on TV appearances, quoted in the newspaper, et cetera, put in front of kind of everyday Canadians or whatever. If there is a major party leader who can, in a clear and convincing way, advance left talking points, then that can have downstream benefits throughout the country, throughout the types of organizing that people are doing, without having to pin all those hopes on that party and that leader specifically leading everyone to the promised land or something like that. And even in the States with Bernie, with Zoran, we see flaws certainly in their own politics, but the charisma and the inspiration and the galvanization has had some benefits and some activation of the general public and awakening of them, making them more amenable to so-called democratic socialism, and in many cases eventually to socialism and leftism more broadly. So I think that that's also something we can see as a benefit from the Lewis victory, is that we will at least not have to be contending with such a watered down version and such a pre-compromising version, especially given what we see from a lot of the provincial NDP parties. We won't have that weakened message being the one going out to the public. We can at least have a coherent and fairly bold, at least within the Canadian mainstream spectrum, message going out that can at least play defense.
It's very bold, especially considering you see from the reaction from the media in this country.
Exactly.
It's funny that you mentioned the efforts to take over the Green Party leadership a couple of years ago, 8 years ago, whenever it was, because I remember speaking to Martin Lukács around that time and saying, like, yeah, we're trying to, get someone installed in the Green Party leadership that's more of a left-wing orientation. He was like, why do you want to take over the Green Party for? We should be taking over the NDP. And now I can't help but feel like 8 years later, I'm like Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park. You did it. You crazy son of a bitch. You did it. I can't help but feel happy for the guy,
Yeah, I mean, I think Martin has been a part of this long-term project with Lewis. I mean, he was one of the people who helped write the Leap Manifesto with Avi and Naomi, and then a bunch of civil society leaders. But and that was sort of, I think that was sort of Avi getting ready to enter elected politics. I don't know whether it was conscious or not, but certainly I think around that time this project kind of took shape, and that's what a huge distinction from someone like Jeremy Corbyn, right, who never planned on being the leader of the UK Labour Party.
Yeah.
It just kind of happened, and I think that explains a lot of his missteps. Another important distinction is I don't think the game Lewis is playing is being prime minister, right? I mean, that was McPherson, right? It's like we need to, yes, be true to our values, but we also need to win with them. Right, like the provincial parties have done in BC and Manitoba, also previously in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, maybe some of the Maritimes provinces. I don't know if they've ever had NDP provincial governments, but but I think the goal for the Lewis-led NDP, and I think this should be the goal of the NDP, is to push is more of is just as much a cultural as is a political project, which is just to push the range of acceptable opinion leftward and to put pressure in a minority government scenario, not by signing a deal with the Liberals like Singh did, like Lewis's grandfather did, and was also a complete shit electorally as a result for it, but to use heft in a minority parliament to extract concessions on a policy by policy basis. Lewis has said if they have another minority where the NDP holds the balance of power, that his one demand is going to be proportional representation. I'm interested to see how that might shake out. Because that would result in the NDP, I think, propping up the Liberals on a lot of things they might not want to do in exchange for like a concession that is uh uh you know gonna take time, gonna take until the next election. But it's interesting, and I think that um it was disappointing that Singh didn't do that, because of course Trudeau in 2015 generated so much excitement. So he was like, this is gonna be the last election under first past the
Yeah.
post, and then he gets elected. And he's like, well, actually, it turns out that it's not just first past the post versus proportional representation. There are actually a bunch of other non-first past the post systems, and we don't have a consensus. So sorry.
Yeah, and some of
Um,
us, I don't want to name any names, but some of us actually voted for the Liberals for the first time in our lives in that election under the express
oh my
understanding
God.
that doing
I
so
knew, I knew the second he did it, he was lying.
that
And
doing
I
so
mean,
was going to lead to some actual electoral reform
I
in the
mean,
country.
I'm embarrassed too. I voted for Tom Mulcair's NDP, right? So there's like,
Yeah.
there was sort of no one good to vote for in that election, or
The
really,
guy that's such a brilliant politician, he made Justin Trudeau look like a firebrand progressive upstart.
yeah. And Martin's book on Trudeau is really fantastic for
Yeah.
sort of explaining how Trudeau is able to seize this like populist discontent to deliver status quo policies.
Well, honestly,
That was
this is a really good segue, Jeremy, to talk about something that, has been on my mind a lot when we get into this, which is, you see some of the reaction to Avi Lewis's victory, and some people talking about like the polling. Oh, look at where the polling is on things like immigration or things like climate policy or energy infrastructure. He's got all this work to do because of this. And I wonder how much of the ways people's opinions on this have shifted over the last few years is a reaction to Trudeau, and the fact that it really can be boiled down to everyone feels this sense of precarity. Everyone's life has gotten more difficult. Everything's become more expensive, especially housing. And people have this totally false understanding of what Trudeau was about because of our media and because of this kind of myth of Trudeau that he was this big progressive champion who opened the borders to all these immigrants and made oil illegal and all this stuff. And people have a complete misconception about what Trudeau's actual policies were. And what they're reacting to is like their own personal material reality getting worse over those years. They believe these things about Trudeau's supposed progressive policies is what's causing it. And these demagogues kind of step up in place to scapegoat whoever, immigrants or trans people or environmental activists or whatever it is. And I think a lot of these poll numbers that we're seeing is a response to that. And that's why I think there should be a kind of resistance to this effort to, let's tone down the messaging. Let's change the strategy because of all these unpopular ideas, when really I think a lot of people have ideas about what's going on in this country based on a completely distorted understanding about Trudeau and what's been going on for the last decade. Is that something that you two are picking up on?
Cam, do you want to
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
take that? Sorry, I feel bad. I've been like monopolizing this conversation.
Well, Cam, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I mean that's essentially my analysis as well, and has been for a number of years. Is that yeah, this liberal playbook from the 2010s of kind of paying lip service so frequently and so kind of bombastically at times, or in such a corny way at times, to social movements has ultimately led to the actual vulnerable people being referenced, in many cases bearing the brunt of the backlash to the completely ineffectual liberal policies that those politicians rode on, while embroiling and intertwining various demographics and movements with them that they actually did not deliver many, if any, benefits to, but were happy to sell themselves to progressive voters as being affiliated with. And when I say liberals, I'm using a small L, because I think that is the exact playbook we have seen, at least from the BC NDP, over about the same past decade period, as the Trudeau government, just bumped, started a year and a half later. And another similarity actually is that the BC NDP rat-fucked electoral reform to undermine the Greens, which were kind of the further left party generally. They weren't necessarily under Weaver, but have been for most of the past decade, kind of after that. And Weaver is kind of a Mulcair figure and is essentially a conservative now and like a Victoria politics crank on Twitter. Like it's going to take forever to get into it. But yeah, essentially Horgan was able to, I would argue deliberately, frustrate the actual playing out of his initial commitment to electoral reform by having a confusing and multi-pronged choice on the ballot when BC went to referendum that ultimately allowed the NDP to avoid proportional representation of some form taking hold in BC while not overtly appearing to be against it. So they were a little bit more savvy than Trudeau was with it. But the BC NDP, as kind of a federal NDP, federal Liberal coalition in the province, often operates quite similarly to the federal Liberals as the kind of natural ruling party, center-left party. But I would argue, again, under Eby, who lacks the charisma of Horgan, just as Mulcair lacked the charisma of Layton, we've seen, and just through the the fatigue of the party being in power for what's now 9 years. We've seen the bloom really come off the rose there, and such a difficulty keeping the coalition together, but a difficulty in retaining any sort of base because the party has compromised so far to the center-right over the course of this time in power, particularly recently over Eby. But under Horgan, along this way, we saw these kind of Trudeau-like hanging out to dry almost of minorities, of marginalized people. Most famously, when Horgan announced the renovation or the rebuilding, of the Royal BC Museum in Victoria. There were several reasons for that. There was asbestos and seismic concerns within the building. There was a lot of desire, I think, from Horgan to end his time with a legacy project that would stand and that he would be associated with and remembered for. But in the announcement of that replacement museum, which was overwhelmingly unpopular immediately upon announcement, was something like $850 to $900 million would be allocated to it. This was during COVID. This was during times of inflation was really starting to rise at that time and has continued to do so. So it was exceedingly unpopular. They tried to salvage its branding initially when they announced it by saying it was needed for reconciliation. Of course, it turned out in the ensuing week or so, 2 weeks, that the First Nations various leaders had not asked for this in any shape or form. It would not have been many of their preferred form of, let's call it museum reform. There was a lot of appetite for a distributed model of more BC museum facilities on different territories that would then fuel tourism. But I kind of go into left field here to cite that example from the BC NDP for two reasons. Number one, to try to illustrate exactly how it looks when these kind of center-left political parties are happy to bring different minority groups along for the ride and then allow them to bear the brunt of the backlash. Because a lot of it was kind of this anti-reconciliation backlash that took shape at that time. They're happy to kind of take the positive PR from it, but they ultimately skate pretty free while leaving people who with less power than them to eat some of the backlash. So I bring it up for that reason to give an example of what that looks like specifically, further to Rob's point about that phenomenon under Trudeau, that kind of Trudeauism, but also to bring up and maybe throw to Jeremy this idea of how is the federal NDP going to reckon with, number one, some of the actual differences in strategy and ideology that it has with the Western governing or aspiring to govern NDP provincial parties. Number one, how are the party leaders going to reconcile that? How is Lewis going to deal with that? But number two, how is the federal NDP, hoping to be resurgent under Lewis, going to deal with what in BC, and I suspect within the next couple of years in Manitoba, there's going to be a level of fatigue, frustration, disconnection from the grassroots with the provincial NDPs that is not unlike the broad electorate's fatigue with Trudeau and disillusionment with some of the politics that he at least gave lip service to, and that kind of thing. So yeah, Jeremy, what's your thought on that? On how will Lewis work with the provincial leaders, number one, and how will he pursue this project of regaining momentum for the federal party while dealing with declining interest, declining momentum, declining trust in many cases in the provincial parties that are more centrist?
Yeah, Jeremy, before you respond, because this is exactly what I wanted to talk to you about as well, because you're obviously so knowledgeable about specifically Alberta politics and what's happening there. But just to provide some additional context, I just wanted to mention that you alluded to this before, but as soon as AVI LEWIS won, you had Naheed Nenshi in Alberta immediately kind of put out a statement distancing the provincial Alberta NDP from what had just happened federally. You also had Carla Beck in Saskatchewan, NDP leader, also put out a quite strong statement basically denouncing AVI LEWIS.
And her chief of staff, Jeremy Nole, was Rachel Notley's chief of staff. And yeah. I'm as confident as can be without being certain that he wrote that, because there's like a personal vendetta in there that I can't see why Carla Beck would have it.
Well, and one thing that I noticed when I was trying to look at some of the reaction, especially from right-wing media to talk to you two about today, but looking at like all the various sons across the country and their response to AVI LEWIS, a lot of it is just like NDP in disarray type stories, and it's fracturing the NDP. And there's real elements of truth to that, obviously. And it's interesting how these provincial NDP leaders have provided ammunition to the right and kind of added fuel to this idea that like there's this major fracture within the NDP. So yeah, I'm curious, Jeremy, like what you think, as Cam alluded to, what your thoughts are about how all this is going to work, and this kind of real disconnect and this conflict between the provincial parties and what the program that AVI LEWIS is trying to put in place, and energy, oil and gas, and how all this is going to play out over the next couple of months.
Right. So, Bob Canoe was the adult in the room.
I thought he was great.
He took the position that, and Bob Canoe again is not, doesn't have the same politics as AVI LEWIS. His are, fairly close, I would say, to Naheed Nenshi's, maybe a bit left of that, because Nenshi is like the sort of neoliberal technocrat of neoliberal technocrats. He was a fine mayor of Calgary, won 3 terms, but it's not translating into partisan politics, and what I've heard from people who knew him when he was at City Hall, he's not a team player. It's the Naheed Nenshi show, and I've heard a lot of MLAs are unhappy with him. I would imagine, especially the MLAs, there were only 4 that I was aware of who went to convention. I would guess at least one of them voted for AVI, maybe 2, maybe none, but I have a feeling, as Cam mentioned about the BC NDP, I mean, that's true of the NDP across Western Canada, right? They're able to obtain power because they're a coalition of progressive-ish liberals and New Democrats. And maybe even some Tories, like old school Tories that still have some, vague conception of like a common good. Um, red Tories, right? Whereas the Conservative Party, I mean, particularly in Alberta and now in BC and Saskatchewan, but also, I mean, if you followed the last Manitoba campaign where they just turned up the racism dial to 11, the PCs in Manitoba have all, drifted very far to the right. And so there's this sort of broad coalition that the NDP represents. That is more they're two party systems, right? I mean, except BC, it's more complicated because you've got the Green Party there, and then you've got this further to the right of the Conservatives Party. What's it called, Cam? One BC?
That's one BC, but I mean, it's even more complicated than that because one BC is like a splinter party from the BC Conservatives, and the BC Conservatives were essentially a fringe party, not unlike one BC, until maybe 4 years ago when Aaron Gunn, because he was kicked out of the BC Liberals race, and the BC Liberals were a coalition of like federal Liberals and federal Conservatives, were
Like
like
the corporate liberals.
yeah, business conservative parties. He and like Lindsay Shepherd and Angelo Isidoro and kind of these right wing
All the stars.
all the stars, yeah, exactly. These kind of freaks took over this party that happened to have the right name, conservative, right as Poilievre's star was rising and Trudeau's star was falling. So the BC Liberals changed their name to BC United to try to avoid the lack of popularity of Trudeau, ultimately destroyed their own branding in that process. Meanwhile, the Conservatives had the right name as Poilievre was making the Conservative brand more popular. So the Conservatives, eventually the BC United, there were two right-wing parties for a while, the upstart far-right party and the traditional center-right party, but it was going under a different name. Eventually, Kevin Falcon, the leader of that party, completely capitulated like a month and a half before the election, or 2 months it was. So thinking that the parties would kind of merge, ultimately the BC Conservatives only took 3 MLAs from BC United, one of whom is now running for leadership of the BC Conservatives because the BC Conservatives, and this is the point here, imploded because they were all cranks. All the MLAs were just insane people who were like scared of Wi-Fi and all kinds of things. And so Dallas Brody and two others spun off into what they called One BC because the BC Conservatives wouldn't let them be racist anymore, or racist enough anymore. And One BC is essentially just an anti-Indigenous party. Like that's the only purpose of it.
It's kind of right. That's the division.
That is the primary division. And so there was just another MLA kicked out of the party for personal misconduct. I'll have to look up exactly what it was. But yeah, this coalition of the hard right conservatives is unable to keep itself together. But the hope from conservative interests in general in BC, I think, is that Peter Millibar will win this party leadership race and allow what they kind of hastily attempted a year and a half ago, which is taking over this kind of suddenly rising populist hard right party with like a business friendly and more PR friendly classic conservative business conservative leadership, and being able to have both and put together a large enough coalition to win power again in the province. But they're really having trouble keeping together the personalities that are attracted to these sorts of things. So I tried to rattle it off as quickly as possible. But to answer your question, Jeremy, yes, there is another right-wing party in BC.
Yeah, and that's similar to the UCP. I mean, had Danielle Smith not taken over, had they not turfed Jason Kenney, there would have been definitely, in Alberta's context, a separatist splinter party. And the separatists are also, I mean, they're anti lots of things, but one of them is Indigenous, although I was talking to Naomi Klein actually at convention, not to brag. She said she likes my work. Again, not to brag. But how about how the Alberta separatists have sort of created this mirror world, right? This doppelganger of like Indigenous rights. Their leading lawyer, Jeffrey Rath, um, is actually a First Nations law lawyer who owes millions of dollars to First Nations as he is charging wild contingency fees. And he's been cited by the Law Society for his dealings with First Nations, but he's saying, no, 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 you're going to have an even better, we're going to have better treaties in independent Alberta, not like this. And we're all going to be treated as individuals. And there's a lot of mixed messaging that ranges from confused to assimilationist coming from the separatists. But anyways, yeah. So my point though was Wob was the adults about it, and I think him and Avi have known each other for a long time. Their parents, they were friends. I believe Wob's father was a chief of some sort. Um, I could be wrong about that, but they were saying that they both come from political families. And so it makes sense that he'll play this role as a peacemaker um, um, in the party. And he said, look, I love Avi. I think he's a great guy. He ran a great campaign. He was very clear about where he stands on the issues. And yeah, we don't agree on everything, and that's okay. And that's been Avi's messaging too, as people affiliated with the Alberta NDP were sharing like 5 second, like not even trying to make it look like it's not out of context clips of him and Naomi mocking the Alberta NDP. Um, uh, he was just saying, look, my door is open for everyone. We don't have to agree on everything, but we're all New Democrats. He went on TV after Nenshi released his statement and Carla Beck released even her worst statement and said, look, I hope they both become premier. I want them to win. And of course, as was predictable, Danielle Smith, and I'm sure Scott Moe did too, I just don't follow those politics as closely, came out and said, oh, Naheed Nenshi's boss, right? That the federal party is the boss of the Alberta NDP. Look at all these things he believes. And then she, issues this statement saying, yeah, look, I'm not even a member of the federal party. AVI LEWIS is bad for Alberta. These aren't our policies. And it's hard to see what he gained from that because, except for appealing to liberals who are already going to vote for him anyways, um, because Smith was just like, oh, yeah, well, it says in the Alberta NDP constitution that you're a wing of the federal party. So, too bad. And when then she became leader, he made it so that people who join the Alberta NDP can opt out of the federal NDP, which I actually don't think is a bad idea. Because I do think the NDP affiliation does harm the party in parts of Calgary in like rural Alberta at that particular time. We'll see what happens in the future. But it's also like, then she ended his statement just slamming Lewis and then saying, but our focus is on defeating Danielle Smith in her separatist agenda. And it's like, well, then why don't you talk about that instead of trashing Lewis before he was even finished his victory speech, right? And, then she probably wrote it a week earlier.
There's some actual excitement happening around the NDP for the first time in as long as anyone can remember. Let's make sure we announce that immediately.
You don't have to share his politics, but like people are excited about him. Again, I spoke with a fair amount of Heather McPherson supporters at convention. I think there was a disproportionate number of them at convention. Like we saw on the second day where each candidate did their showcase. Lewis was up first. And he was up on stage with his wife, Naomi Klein, with Leah Gazan, with his sort of core team of supporters, and he's gave quite a good speech that the people on stage were so hyped for. But then you saw sort of on the convention floor, the response was quite muted. And then when it's Heather's turn to go up, and I believe she was the last person up, um, Rachel Notley comes out to introduce her, and she gets a standing ovation before she opens her mouth, right? Which shows that there were a lot of disproportionate amount of McPherson supporters on the floor that day. Of course, I think some AVI supporters would give a standing ovation to Rachel Notley because, she's a hell of a lot better than what Alberta has now, for all her flaws, which, I've documented quite extensively. But yeah,
it feels like Notley's whole tenure as Premier of Alberta, like as much as whenever I've talked to anyone like that's been part of these kind of like progressive circles in Alberta, this is what it always circles back to, is this delicate dance that the NDP has to do with the oil and gas industry and who are under relentless attacks, highly well-funded attacks by this industry. And there's been this effort, right, to try and play nice with the oil and gas industry, to not let anyone frame them as being like in opposition to the industry and the workers that are there. And it just seems like this strategy has never really metastasized into anything. It seems like the Conservatives in these Western provinces still do view them as being oil-hating communists. And this has always been the criticism, that there's no real way to try and make nice with this industry when you're going to be framed in this way anyway. And in addition to the actual scientifically proven dangers of this continual fixation on fossil fuels, and in addition to that, the way that fossil fuels now, as a result of what's going on in Iran and the Middle East, are starting to become the real economic difficulty for average people that must rely on fossil fuels for energy. And there's been no transition to kind of move us away from that. So this seems to be exactly like what's animated a lot of the excitement behind AVI Lewis, is people wanting to kind of reject this idea that we can have it both ways. We can be a kind of progressive party, and we can also be nice to the oil industry, and we can promote things like pipelines. It just seems like, to me, and I think a lot of others, that it seems to be kind of a losing prospect. And that seems to be the difficulty here with what the messaging that they're trying to put out about this industry. And one thing that Avi talks about that I think is important to keep talking about is that some of the people that are the most screwed over by the oil and gas industry are oil and gas industry workers. And
yes, and rural landowners.
Yes.
And you're seeing a big tension there, because those are two key parts of the UCP coalition. But these oil and gas people, they pump and dump on rural landowners on farms, and then they just leave their inactive well because no one's forcing them to clean it up. And now Smith is trying to find a way to give them money to reward them for not cleaning up their mess. And that was actually a very effective video that Lewis put out, which I suspect might have been Emma Jackson, of great climate activist here in Edmonton, who worked for the Lewis campaign's idea. Because I mean, again, that's a means by which the Alberta NDP could win support in places that are traditionally hostile towards it. They're just not meeting the moment. But I think, Smith is such a talented populist politician, right? She talks about how there are these elites, and she's very clear about who these elites are. It's the bureaucrats and the woke federal government in Ottawa. It's public health officials here, inept public health officials. She said, and she is representing the people who have been left behind by them, right? And I think what's really exciting about Lewis and what Notley really failed to do as opposition leader, and Nenshi is failing to do again, is to capture this populist anger that is righteous and justified, and give it form to explain to people what's really going on. And I think if you watch Lewis's first press conference on Monday, I think one of the most interesting uh responses he gave, though apparently the question was in French, and apparently he fumbled it a bit in French, because I mean he's not fluent yet in French, although as I understand it, he had the least bad French of any of the candidates. There was that absurd spectacle of the French debate that they had, where
Yeah,
none of them could
that wasn't
speak
great.
fluently in French, and they had to speak in English, and it was quite um disastrous. But in English, he was asked, do you consider yourself a populist? And he's like, well, yeah, I mean, I think we should talk about what populism is. And it's this view that there's this small elite that is dominating politics and is shutting out the vast majority of people. And right-wing populists take that and they blame Jews or immigrants or Muslims or other minority groups, climate activists or whatever. And he's like, I hope this country's, I think he said storytelling class, which was a very interesting turn of phrase, is interested in, talking about left-wing populism that is squarely focused on the economic elites that are dominating our lives in Canada.
Yeah, they've been talking about it, and they've been talking about it, saying it's just as bad as right wing populism and left wing populism are basically the same thing, and we've got to ditch it.
And meanwhile, Nenshi um is saying, politicians who pit bosses against their workers are dangerous, which was a thinly veiled dig at Avi. And it's like, no, Avi Lewis isn't pitting workers against their bosses. The system is pitting workers against their bosses, and Avi is articulating the reality. Whereas Nenshi is just like, we just all need to get along.
Yeah,
Except with, though, I mean, Nenshi has said he'll meet with Lewis. And one last thing before I let Kim speak again, because the chat is itching to hear from Cam.
everyone wants more
Dr.
Cam.
Maggot says that they're a long-standing Jeremy stan, but they're becoming a Cam stan. So I will
Damn.
let you stand Cam in a moment. But I think there's sort of an irony in that I think Stephen Lewis dying has kind of forced Nenshi and both Carla Beck. I mean, Nenshi was already kind of backtracking. He was asked by a local reporter here in Edmonton whether he's planning on changing the party name. And he's like, well, we saw BC United. That doesn't really work, and people are smart enough to know that, we're not the same as the federal party, and which was more of a conciliatory tone. But after Stephen Lewis died, Nenshi released a statement about what a great Canadian he was, and how, he's wishing Avi, he sends his condolences to Avi. And Carla Beck said the same, but then she was like, oh, also, I'd love to meet with Avi when he's ready, which is a huge backtrack. And of course the media class, I mean, Stephen Lewis, we can't forget, was an establishment figure who purged the NDP of its left flank, and I think due to Avi's influence, has certainly moved left in the past decade. I mean, he supported the Leap Manifesto. Over the past few years, he's become a staunch opponent of the genocide in Gaza, and Stephen Lewis was always a supporter of Israel. It's interesting, and I can't imagine how crazy the past week has been for the Lewis family. But
No, it's been interesting because you see that reaction completely contrasting with the sort of weird concern trolling that's been going on. And just to something you're saying too, it's just, this is something that I always find so irritating about this concern trolling about left-wing populism, or this idea, oh, he's pitting workers against their bosses, or framing things like a public telecom company or a public grocery as these like radical ideas. Everyone hates their boss. Everyone hates their fucking telecom company. Everyone hates going to the grocery store and feeling like they're unable to afford basic things that they could just a short time ago. Like, everyone is feeling, like I've been talking about, this sense of precarity. Even if you have a decent job and you've been getting raises, if your housing is also going up and your groceries are going up and your gas is going up, you're effectively making less money each and every year. And that's why a lot of people are responsive, or are being manipulated, I think, by a lot of these narratives about who's responsible for that. But that's what I always find so amazing about this kind of tutting about this left-wing populist agenda and how no one could ever possibly support it, when these are just like basic common sense thing that affects everyone, that's making everyone totally miserable in this country. But yeah, Cam, I'd like to hear from you on this as well, or whatever you want to pick up on from the last 10 minutes of discussion.
No, I think that this is a great place to jump off of, because so much of what we're saying right now relates to Avi's victory speech, which we mentioned briefly earlier.
And we never actually got around to getting into, so perfect.
It's worth a listen. I'll just take a few minutes to kind of talk about it, give people the gist of it. He specifically said very similarly to what you're saying. And I think that this is part of, we saw hints and previews of what his messaging strategy will be for the coming months, the coming years, and potentially his tenure here. Is that there is really an effort, it seems like, to square the circle of the kind of complacent, self-interested kind of settler Canadian public with kind of, this left populism and progressivism. So he's specifically trying to make hay in a lot of his messaging recently about things like the telecom companies, and not only kind of wealth concentration in the abstract, but he had this in his victory speech a few minutes in, he talks about, he said, I can hear the naysayers now. Where are you going to get the money? We're going to get, the money is there. We just have to go get it. And so he's saying, the big oil made such and such last year. The big banks made 20 million or whatever it is. And he's talking, or no, it was Galen Weston has 20 million in personal fortune. They fixed the price of bread, for heaven's sake. Like, he's kind of going on in his like rhetorical rising. And then he talks about, I think it was Bell or Rogers or something, and he's saying they have this and that, and then he says, and the worst customer service in Canada. Like, he's riffing a little bit, he's doing bits, but he's trying to do these relatable moments around these kind of so-called kitchen table issues, and very literally kitchen table in like, this is like you're on the phone with to get your phone plan fixed. You're seeing your hydro bill, that kind of thing. So he's making these momentary appeals through catchy language very often about this kind of cost of living. And he even said at one point, which I did think was a bit of a misstep, talking about the devastation in Iran and in Gaza, perpetuated by the US and Israel. And then he says, and domestically, there's an even greater crisis. And then he talks about the cost of living. And it's like, well, it's probably not actually a greater crisis that like bananas cost 89 cents instead of 79 versus like people being slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands. But I see what he's getting at. He's trying to put these two things in concert and in conversation with each other. And there's specifically a move that he makes that I want to talk about because I think it actually is really related to Naomi Klein and her messaging and her writing, because Avi is crafting his messaging around how will he deal with the popularity of Carney, which is undeniable right now, and he clearly has a patience He's talked specifically about year-round organizing outside of the federal election cycle. He is not intending, it seems, to run for a seat anytime soon. It seems clear that his strategy is to build up the NDP brand nationwide over the course of several years and then take on Carney when the bloom has come off the rose, as I kind of said before, off of this red liberal rose that is so shiny right now. And so he makes these concessions early on in his victory speech. He says, Carney is a smart guy. Canadians want to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I don't blame them. But he says, but he sold us this vision of elbows up. And then he lists, he kind of says, but what we're seeing is an embrace in miniature of the US agenda. And he's talking about $500 billion for weapons of war, trampling over indigenous rights, all in on job killing, generative AI, and pipelines. And so he's listing these few things that we as leftists see as kind of clear problems with Carney. But he's not just appealing to us in citing these things, or not just targeting kind of weak points of Carney from the left. I think that this set of problems, these set of priorities, are a combination that actually comes from Naomi Klein's work. Because you see over the past year and leading up to her book release in the fall, she's talking about this concept of end times fascism, which she sees, and she wrote an article in The Guardian about it that's worth looking at. This was about a year ago. She's talking about the combination of kind of the bunker fascism of, say, a Peter Thiel, with kind of the stripping the copper wires approach of like Doge and like the Trump administration's giveaways. It's talking about war and destruction in the Middle East, specifically for oil, this resurgence of prioritization of fossil fuels, not even necessarily bothering that hard to deny that climate change is occurring, but simply saying we're going to get while the getting's good. You see a mini version of this in Canadian politics, where the denialism takes the form of like, well, Canada is only 0.5% of the total emissions. We'll never matter either way, so we've got to just take care of ourselves.
You hear that a lot in Alberta.
Yeah, and we're just shipping the resources here elsewhere, so the emissions are consumed elsewhere. And also, we have other countries in the global south, China and whoever else, making all our stuff that we bring here, so all the emissions are there.
Yeah. So
yeah, damn, how'd that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was I? Oh yeah. So this in Klein's framing, specifically generative AI, specifically data centers, specifically fossil fuels, specifically rearmament, investment in military, investment in weapons, the starting of wars and skirmishes for resources. These are all kind of part or anti-migrant policy. To her, these are all part of kind of a suite of policies, a political project of preparing for the end, preparing for the apocalypse, in the sense of preparing to no longer have a society to be responsible to. And so I think we should watch for Lewis's language over the next little while about what he frames as the US agenda, what he frames as Carney's version of the US agenda, because I think especially around the time that that in the fall, when Klein will publish this book, we'll see crystallization of this messaging around this idea of like an anti-human, chaotic politics, not only kind of the standard exploitation by the 1%, but specifically the 1% as this group that's willing to allow the population to burn, not only be exploited, but to be left to the ravages. Because we see in Abby's messaging, in some of the rallies and in this victory speech, pulling on the same threads, highlighting the same villains, as Klein is ultimately going to be pitching as kind of a shared project in her writing and her presumably media appearances 4 or 5 months from now. Which was that was kind of a tangent, but I think that it's something that I haven't heard people talk about. They've talked about this power couple. He's had the fun buttons with, like, Naomi Klein's husband, but these are two people who have been talking at the dinner table for 30 plus years, and so I think we can look to Klein's work to see previews and echoes of some of the messaging that that Lewis will ultimately deploy as part of his case against the elite and against the current government.
Yeah, and I think that's important. The Naomi Klein factor too, because it's also something that gives me hope. Is that Naomi Klein will keep him honest, and will stop him from being like co-opted by the establishment. And maybe I'm reading too much into their partnership. But I don't know, it does give me hope knowing that, because really, I mean, he is, the vote for Naomi's husband. I mean, it's funny because, like, it's also like, yeah, like Naomi's a lot more, has been a lot more famous than him, until maybe the past few days. So he is very much Naomi Klein's husband. But I was wondering, Rob, do you want to talk about some of the media meltdown over it?
Yes, I do.
Because I think it's very funny stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I thought maybe we could fill the gap that we have now by the loss of classic, wonderful podcast, Big Shiny Takes, and could go over a particularly unhinged piece and read that. But did you have any specific thoughts before getting to that about some of this, like some of the takes that we have seen? Because there's been a lot of AVI derangement system. AVI derangement syndrome is already seems like it's claimed a number of victims. Was there anything specifically that stuck out to you as far as the response?
Well, I think it's just this mischaracterization of his policies by people who are either lying or just didn't bother to read his platform, which is, I noticed when I was doing research for a piece on leadership race for Alberta Views, is not, and I think this is a strength of his platform was very simple. It was very to the point. It wasn't, I guess wonkish, for lack of a better term. Like, it's like, here's these problems, here's how we're addressing them. And even before he became leader, there was this piece going around from this like conservative consultant guy named Fred Laurie, talking about how, like, this is going to be the end of the NDP, that Lewis is so extreme, like he wants to get rid of the Canadian military, stop and use of fossil fuels by Tuesday, and there was one other thing that was a straw man of a Lewis policy. And so I think that's the important for, like,
he's gonna frog march all these oil executives to the town square, and it's like, don't threaten me with a good time, please.
Yeah, it's like, I like Avi, but
like to vote for it.
The media freak out, and I think Rachel Gilmore, I know someone in the comments mentioned her videos on this, who's great. I think she made a similar point in a recent video where it's like, he's on to something, because these establishment media hacks don't know what to do. They're so used to just being, us being offered complete slop, the same neoliberal slop, different variations of it from 3 or 4 parties. So someone who's clearly articulating that as a problem in offering alternatives to it, it's getting them quite scared. I don't know if you have a personal favorite freak out. Mine is definitely, I'm in Alberta. Guy handed to Don Braid at the Calgary Herald.
That's exactly what I had queued up to look at.
Yeah. You can't get more unhinged than that. I mean, Braid's also, Braid's like a Tory, right? Like because for the project I've been working on that is coming out in 6 months. It's a book on Danielle Smith. I don't know why I'm being secretive about it. It's out there. But I've been reading a lot of old Calgary Herald articles, especially from the period I wasn't as familiar with, like 2012, 2013, when Smith was this upstart populist right-wing leader of the Wild Rose, and then you had the PCs who had been in power forever. And you read Braden, he's a PC guy, right? He wasn't a Wild Rose guy. Him and Danielle Smith were both scabs during the Calgary Herald strike in 1999, 2000, by the way. But yeah, he's he's an establishment guy. He gets a lot of stuff from the UCP that they give to him because they want it to be out there. But he's also, because he is a Tory, when he'll like support the broader UCP agenda. And then when he feels that they've gone too far, he'll be like, whoa, and it's like, what do you expect? So he doesn't like populism, I think is what we can say. And I've seen some other, more liberal types, including some people who I have great respect for join this freak out on Lewis and saying that this is just, the horseshoe theory bullshit that
of course,
essentially
I'm just always so perplexed.
Resurrecting this Bernie bro discourse where it's like how mean his supporters are online, how
doing
toxic
that as
they
well.
are.
Okay.
And I'm like, I haven't been seeing that. The most nastiness I've seen in this campaign has been from prominent McPherson supporters like Lou Arab, who's Rachel Notley's husband and works for QP. I know Lou, I like him. But he was sharing out of context clips of Lewis and talking about what a disaster he'll be. And Shannon Phillips, the former environment minister, who I also know and quite like, and she used to be quite close friends with Naomi Klein and AVI LEWIS before, and used to be quite radical before becoming the, environment and parks minister for the Alberta NDP government. I'm sure there have been, but I've also been seeing a less prominent person I have in mind. When Lewis announced he was running, was saying if Lewis wins, I'm never voting NDP again. He thinks he's right, and he's so condescending towards anyone who disagrees with him. And then like a week later, the same guy's posting, now listen, you Avi bros, I'm going to explain this to you in words you can understand. And it's like, that is more condescending than anything I've ever heard Avi Lewis say. And Avi does have a certain arrogance to him that I think is a Lewis family trait, but I also think he is a compassionate person.
I like that. I think we're past the point on the left of asking for permission. Oh, can we please talk about public grocery stores, or can you please talk about these moderate solutions? This is one of the things that drives me crazy about the reaction to Avi Lewis. We saw a lot of this in the US with Zohran Mamdani over the last couple of months. It's like we all understand that these economic problems exist, and we all talk about inflation and all these serious economic issues. And someone like Pierre Poilievre goes around and talks about these kitchen table issues, and the media falls over themselves to talk about, he's relentlessly zeroing in on these economic problems and with housing and all these things that people are experiencing in this country, these economic bona fides. And then you look at what his actual proposals are, and it's just austerity and tax cuts. It's the same conservative economic program that it's been for the last, as long as I can remember, for my entire lifetime. It's not interesting. It's not doing anything. It's all has been proven basically scientifically to contribute to all these problems rather than alleviating them. And then like when someone comes around, whether it's Avi Lewis or Zohran Mamdani or Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn or whoever, and says, here's some like very moderate, sensible ideas about addressing these economic issues that people are experiencing, whether it's grocery prices or housing prices or whatever else. And it gets talked about like it's this like outrageous, extreme idea. I think it's crazy the way that this discourse seems to play out over and over. And you can see it's because it's people that are protecting power ultimately and it's kind of circling their wagons around the powerful interests that are going to be under threat in this kind of a mild program. I mean, we didn't even really get into the response also from people like Jesse Brown, like Barbara and John Kay, or from CIJA or whatever to talk about this Jewish man that was just elected as party leader. How now this is even more evidence of the dangerous climate for Jewish people in Canada.
Yeah. Can I talk? I'll be uncharacteristically brief with this because I do think it's important. Because like Nenshi right issued his statement, and then she's been okay on Palestine stuff. I mean, under pressure from I think people within the party who want to say something. But nonetheless, he issued his statement and that was focused on the oil and gas stuff. And that's really the big thing that they're going to beat Lewis over the head with. CIJA also like clearly had written a statement well before Lewis was selected as leader, giving this sob story about one of their board members whose dad was involved with the NDP like 60 years ago. And how she feels unsafe in the party, and that, Lewis is Jewish, but that's no shield for accountability, which is a line I'm going to keep in my pocket for them at a certain point. But I was talking with a friend of mine who is, politically roughly aligned with me, but is more involved, I would say, with the Jewish community here in Edmonton, the mainstream Jewish community here. And we were texting right after Lewis won, and he was like, CIJA are scared, like they are freaking out. And I'm like, yeah, they should be because that's another important difference with Corbyn is that you can't smear, like they're going to try and smear him as anti-Semitic for sure. And again, the new party president is also Jewish, Niall Ricardo. They'll try and smear them as anti-Semitic. But again, their line is we need to listen to Jews, right? We need to, they sort of adopt this caricature of like woke language to say that we just need to listen to what Jewish people are saying. And if Jewish people say the sky is green, then, pretty anti-Semitic if you say it's blue. And now you have prominent Jewish person from a prominent Jewish family that, I think Avi kind of oversimplifies his family history vis-a-vis Zionism, but, his grandfather was raised in a Bundist household, which was anti-Zionist. And, David Lewis certainly became a Zionist during his political career, but I think there was always an ambivalence there. And Stephen Lewis, because he's a boomer, I think was more adopted the Zionist, sort of labor Zion. Because I mean, again, Israel was, for all its very well documented flaws, a social democratic country for its first like 25, 30 years, right? So but my point is CIJA is scared, and they should be, because their smears aren't going to work against him. They'll work for people who are already Zionists, but for the vast majority of the public, and Jewish people who are Zionists and aren't going to change their mind, but for the vast majority of the public, I think it'll be quite confusing to them when you have a group that claims to do Jewish advocacy and they are attempting to undermine Jewish party leader who, you know, uh, significant chunk of his very small caucus, meaning Leah Gazan, is also Jewish. The party president's Jewish. You know, and yeah, I think it'll be a head scratcher for a lot of people to be like, hey, maybe this organization isn't actually doing Jewish advocacy. They're using that as a mask to represent the interests of the state of Israel. And you know, you love to see it.
Yes. Yes. No, that's been they're definitely a very interesting part of this reaction. Anyway,
did we talk about it? Speaking of this topic, about the the new low, if there can be one, for Selena Robinson, the former BC finance minister.
Oh yeah, I mean that's part of this. That's part of this discussion as well.
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, because and that wasn't that about Wobbs.
Oh yeah, because there's this broader right wing manufactured freak out about the convention, like equity cards and stuff, and like people being corrected for misgendering the chair, which I didn't even notice, and I was there because it was such a small part of what was happening. And you know, there was something over the tribute to Jagmeet Singh video. Someone was pissed about it, and then someone like accused him of racism, and I think Nora was telling me about it, and I just laughed like it was so minor and insignificant. But yeah, Wobb's speech, there's a killer line in it. It crushed where and he's been talking about this as a word to distract from the Epstein
class
scandal.
Yeah,
Which you know, I think is an oversimplification of the Iran war for sure, but I do think that's probably a factor.
I definitely think it's a little bit weird when someone says Epstein class and you immediately say, hey, whoa, that includes me, so you better watch out.
Yeah.
I think that's a bit of a weird reaction.
Let the Epstein class fight the Epstein war. And Selena Robinson, who former BC advanced education minister, one of the only public figures I can think of that was actually punished for doing anti-Palestinian racism because she went on a
part of the quiet pogrom that's been happening in the country. It's very scary.
That Jesse Brown has talked about. Very quiet, almost imperceptible. But yeah, and she basically said on this webinar with B'nai B'rith, one of the big pro-Israel lobbying groups masquerading as a Jewish advocacy organization, and she said that, yeah, I mean, you have to remember Palestine was just a crappy piece of land before Jews came there, and even B'nai B'rith, which is, I mean, a partisan conservative organization, more so even than CIJA. Their past two presidents were failed Conservative Party of Canada candidates, Frank Dumont and Michael Mostyn. But even they distance themselves because I think they're smart enough to know the implications of that. That you're invoking terra nullius for Israel, and people can see the parallel there, right? And their whole thing is no. Jews are indigenous. I'm indigenous to Israel. I've never lived there in my life. I can't trace any lineage back there. I do have family who lives there, but they're all from Europe originally. You know, but I'm indigenous. I'm indigenous. Forget about the material conditions of Palestinians and how similar they look to First Nations in Canada, you know, but worse. Or the fact that, I mean, is the founders of Zionism explicitly said this is a colonialist movement and it's good, and that's why you should support it. No. We're indigenous. And now she's doing the whole you know, canceled because woke thing. I think she wrote a book that I'm sure very few people read.
Tens of people have read this book, Jeremy.
Yeah, but I bet you my Jason Kenney book written, you know, published like 2 years after he stopped being premier sold more copies than her Everyone's Anti-Semitic Who Doesn't Like Me book.
Oh, by far. I think more people in this chat have read your book than people in the world.
Well, I mean, that's not necessarily representative of the broader public, but certainly I would say that. I don't think it was flying off the shelves. And yeah, I mean, she did a racism. She apologized for it, agreed to do Islamophobia training, but of course, anti-Palestinian racism, while there's Islamophobia is an element of it, it's not just Islamophobia. There are people who aren't Islamophobic who are anti-Palestinian racists. You know, I can tell you that because I know some. Um, um, but and then yeah, and then they fired her because, and now she's saying, "Oh, I was taken out of context. You're misinterpreting me. I was just defending Israel's right to exist. That's all I was doing."
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah, and this was, I should also mention, this was a classic case of like EB's kind of preposterous. Well, it's not conceptually preposterous, but I think frequently backfiring public relations strategy, where initially when this broke, there was like attempt to ignore it. Then it was like there was like a mild apology and a promise to do some training. Then there was like distancing her from her role as education minister because there was also accusations that she had influenced public education, well, secondary education institutions in BC against kind of Palestinian encampments and demonstrations. I believe it was. This was a little while ago, so I might be not getting it perfectly. But it like this was over the course of a weekend, and so there were basically four versions of like Selena Robinson gets in trouble. Because each response by the province and by her was obviously inadequate. And mosque leaders and indigenous leaders, because of, as you point out, the implication, the parallel, were kept up on it to their credit until eventually EB basically concluded it seems that she was more trouble than she was worth. And I think she had already said she was not going to run for re-election. But I think she basically kind of rage quit at a certain point on all this and kind of left to become a full-time Twitter crank, which is like her occupation now.
Yep.
Like she is no different than any number of like random trolls in BC politics.
well, that's why her and Jason Kenney, I think, get along so well now.
Yeah, I always think about the meme of like the text from your dad coming in. How's the job search going? Like whenever I hear like she's just engaging in just random like Twitter drama all day, targeting random Lobby accounts for whatever reason.
Yeah, but anyway, so what she said was, hold on, I can try and let me find the tweet unless one of you have it up already. Because
so, I mean, my homepage is the Selena Robinson feed, but I'm not on my homepage because we're chatting. But yeah, so her and some of these others are like we saw with the NDP leaders you were kind of alluding to, like they complained and whined, but quite soon those haters seem to have become at least part-time waiters at the table of Lewis's success because they're kind of capitulating now. But for figures like this, for these columnists, for Robinson, this is just the latest opportunity to kind of articulate this kind of Jesse Brown like forever crusade against any hook they can find to hang these increasingly ridiculous positions onto for the day or for the week.
Yeah, I did as I was scrolling down to find Selena Robinson's tweet. Um, I did find B'nai B'rith's tweet.
Do you want to send it in the chat, Jeremy?
Yes. Who, and I mean B'nai B'rith again. Oh wait, they have me blocked. So anyways. Yeah. So here's the B'nai B'rith one. It's very long. But basically but Selena Robinson's was the funniest. Because she has like no tact whatsoever. And um fuck. You got the B'nai B'rith one up?
Yeah. Premier Wab, can you owe the Jewish community and the public at large an immediate apology?
The public at large?
Yeah.
What?
At the NDP convention, he said, let the Epstein class fight the Epstein war. That line was an invocation of a loaded and poisonous anti-Semitic dog whistle, which has gained traction around North America over the past months. The idea that sinister, powerful Jewish elites are manipulating events from behind the scenes. When public figures reach for that kind of language, they enter the territory of classic anti-Semitic conspiracy rhetoric, whether they choose to acknowledge it or not. A couple more things. You must apologize clearly, publicly, and without qualification. I feel like this would make more sense as an attack if there wasn't like this documented history of Epstein influencing events behind the scenes, often for the benefit of Israel. Like a very specific thing that was indeed happening, of which there's a long record of email evidence that can prove this.
It's oh, there it is. I found it. It's this, I'm sending you my tweet, which is a screen grab, because she has me blocked.
Yeah.
You
got to keep an eye out for Selena. So even with the block,
yeah,
the Selena monitor is never ceasing.
I am stunned that Wab Kinew would use code word for Jews in this way. Shame on him. Shame on the NDP, who are no longer hiding their hashtag anti-Semitism.
So Epstein class is code word for Jews. Yeah. That's me. And I was talking with some people who I otherwise, agree with, who are maybe a bit uneasy about the use of that term. I guess David Camfield, because we were on a panel on one of the days of convention at the university talking about anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism. And he said, well, why not talk about the Bezos class, right? Like, why Epstein class? And I think it's because Jeff Bezos wasn't sex trafficking minors. Is
that's
probably
what I mean.
why.
Like, I agree that maybe it could be not effective as an attack phrase, or it could be confusing when you're trying to talk about capitalism, whatever. I also think that like it's kind of an immediate shorthand that most normies will immediately understand is about like the real sicko depravity of this ruling class, not any specific group of people, but the people that are connected to this person, which was a whole bunch of different people from around the world and different political parties and different traditions and different religions. It had nothing to do with anyone's specific religion, even though, as we know, Epstein was kind of doing a lot of stuff on behalf of Israel, the country. But really, it's a shorthand to talk about how depraved and sick this ruling class is, I think.
Yeah, and I don't think we on the left should give, and where I disagree with David is I don't think we should give an inch to what is clearly a bad face smear. And I'm sure you would agree with, in this context is a bad face smear, but he had some unease about it. I don't. Again, our anti-Semitic far right people talking about an Epstein class in an anti-Semitic way, probably, but I think it is a term that illustrates the depravity of our ruling class, that is multicultural, multi-religious, multinational, multi-ethnic, and all at least willful accomplices in conspiracy to sex traffic teenage girls. And I think that's why, but just back to Selena Robinson, it's so crazy because she's just like, yeah, this is code for Jews. If you're talking about the Epstein class, you're talking about Jews. And it's like she's treating Jeffrey Epstein like she treats the state of Israel.
Yeah.
But you can't say anything bad about it because there are other rich child sex traffickers who aren't Jewish. Yet you're only criticizing the Jewish one. Interesting. Right? I mean, that's the kind of energy it has.
Jeffrey Epstein's not going to see this tweet, but other child sex trafficking elite freaks will, and it's going to hurt their feelings. So
I mean, there are other Jewish child sex traffickers, right? And and if someone's talking about child sex traffickers and they're only talking about the Jewish ones, okay. But I mean, Epstein, other than the fact that it's a notably Jewish name, I mean, it's that's your first response. This is code for Jews. Like, that's anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
That's Jewish self-hatred. Is going to bat for this depraved oligarchic class, because you have this urge to make everything about yourself.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to unpack
your
here.
Fears and anxieties.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to unpack.
So
with
risking this association that the whole point is ostensibly to prevent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's Jason Kenney. I don't think we need to pull it up, but he was like, this is Iranian propaganda. So he kind of had a fresh angle to it. Right? Because the Iranians, I believe, are calling the US the forces the Epstein army. And so to Kenney, they're just, hasn't learned a damn thing since he was so belligerent in supporting the Iraq War as a Canadian Alliance MP in 2003. It's the same slop. I just pointed out to him that his good friend John Baird is in the Epstein files. Went to an event.
Yeah.
Was invited to an event with
Epstein.
Sorry, I said I was going to be uncharacteristically brief, and
you were immediately called out. I saw
that comment too. It's okay. I know you're a cam head now, and that's okay. I am too.
I've won a delegate away from you, Jeremy.
Yeah.
That's right.
Anyway, like, we've gone kind of way over the amount of time I was thinking we were going to talk about all this stuff. If you two don't mind, I would like to read this Don Braid article if you've got a few more minutes. I have to leave in probably about 20 or so we can't spend too much time on it, but I thought that could be kind of fun. Are you two down to do that?
I'm down. I got nowhere to be. I blocked off today for Rob Rousseau show, so
wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, we're part of the Rousseau class, so we have to, to take our
careful. That's anti-francophone code.
Yeah. The Rousseau army. The Rousseau army is marketing.
Yeah. I'm wondering if I should queue up some kind of spooky music at the same time that I read this article. Oh my God, that's not it. That's not what I wanted. What is this? Is this ominous?
They're trying to shut us down?
I'm just going to put on some spooky music in the background while I read this piece. This is by Don Braid. And it's funny, Jeremy, that both of us got to this at the same, without talking about it. It's from Don Braid from the Calgary Herald. Braid. Under new leader AVI LEWIS, federal NDP looks more communist than social democratic. The economic agenda is the deeper danger. The federal NDP, now run by cis male AVI LEWIS, showed us two kinds of crazy at their leadership convention on the weekend. First, there was the social crazy, with arguments over whose victimized identity deserved time at the mic. Delegates who have identified with the same gender assigned at birth, cis people, didn't have much chance. It's also funny to say AVI LEWIS, a cis male, and then you're talking about, they're so obsessed with identity and gender. They don't even have a chance. It's like, clearly they do have a chance, so...
In fairness to Don, he is attempting at being clever, but and keep in mind, Don Braid is like 80-something years old, right? So I was actually surprised that he knew what cis gender means. Maybe someone in the Herald newsroom explained it to him.
He had to get one of his edgelord grandchildren to explain this.
I've heard Yeah, I don't know. I've heard his stepson doesn't like him very much, or his
Wow.
mom, who was also a mainstream media columnist for a long time, Sydney Sharp, and also a scab. But that's just what I hear. It's just goss.
Yeah.
Maybe he has grandkids who talk to him.
Then came economic crazy. I mean, old reactionaries not having grandkids that talk to them pretty much explains a lot of the attitudes that many of these people end up having. Anyway, then came the economic crazy. Lewis's economic notions border on 20th century communism. I do not use that word lightly. Having seen real communism at its worst in East Berlin, the Soviet Union, and satellite Somalia. Did you know, Jeremy and Cam, how scary it was in East Berlin? You know, they were giving people free apartments and they were forcing people to live in free apartments in East Berlin. It's very scary. A very scary situation.
Well, that's why they had to build a wall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People are going to be running away from this.
Yeah, no. So he doesn't need to define communism or let alone social democracy and explain how Lewis's proposals are communist, because he's seen it firsthand. So he knows.
We don't need to get into it. It's when the government does stuff, as we know.
Well, we'll see.
Lewis wants a national bank run by Canada Post. Don't worry, your money will be available after the latest strike.
Okay, first of all, scab.
Yeah.
Never forget.
Yeah.
Second of all, there's only one province in Canada that has a provincially run bank. It's technically not a bank because banks are federal, but we take a wild guess as to which province that is.
Alberta.
Yes, Alberta Treasury Branch, set up by the social credit government in the 1930s. Because the feds wouldn't let them do actual social credit monetary theory, which we could talk about another time because it's really interesting. But Alberta Treasury Branch. It's not publicly owned anymore. I mean, it was privatized in the 90s, but Don Braid, he said he's seen communism firsthand in Somalia, in East Berlin. Well, he would have seen it in Calgary too in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, because Alberta had a publicly owned financial institution.
Yeah, the PRC, the People's Republic of Calgary.
That's right. That's why Calgary's gonna. People are saying if Alberta separates, Edmonton would separate from Alberta. But I think keep your eye on Calgary.
We should bring back the city-state. I think that's something we could talk about.
Vatican City of Calgary.
Yeah.
Well, Calgary kind of is the Vatican for right-wing ghouls in Canada, like the University of Calgary. Tom Flanagan is the Pope.
Yeah. Continuing. Western NDP activists are appalled. They feel Lewis wouldn't have won without heavy membership sales to Green Party followers as well as some communists.
One outcome, like how he does small c communists. I don't think that's true. I don't think there were too many Green Party members who joined the NDP.
All the communists I know are saying, I hate this guy. He's an anti-communist and a liberal Zionist. They can't stand this. And this man.
And how would Braid know any of that? But also Western NDP activists. I meant to say this earlier, but I think I sidetracked myself. But I was talking to a lot of Heather McPherson supporters, and the activists, like the people actually on the ground, not like the big names like Rachel Notley or Shannon Phillips. They're like, yeah, I'll support AVI LEWIS if he's the leader. Like I was speaking to one old friend of mine I knew in Medicine Hat, and Lewis was her bottom pick, but she was like, I didn't support Nenshi either because he's not a New Democrat at all, and in the leadership race, and I'm still going to vote for him. I'm still going to, canvass for candidates for him, and so I'm going to do the same for Lewis. So, again, the idea. Yes, at an elite level, there's certainly a split, and it's obvious. But I think the reason Nenshi and Beck are backtracking is actually the party activists are like, fuck you, give him a chance.
Yeah.
Like let's try and maybe at least like co-opt him, right? And we'll see where that goes. But again, Western NDP activists, like Naheed Nenshi not a Western NDP activist. So yeah, anyways.
Yeah.
And the party also just needs to like rebuild its ground game. Like I think we talked on your stream, Jeremy, about how like what other direction than some version of this was there for the party to go. I think that's true in terms of like messaging to voters, but I think it's also true in terms of like this party's finances and funding and staffing have all been completely eroded, both over the past however many years and specifically from losing party status. Like they do have to make some sort of attempt to re-engage people who can have any kind of ground game for them. And that is something that can be transferred back and forth between the provincial parties and the federal party. So it is in their interests logistically, probably to try and make amends with the federal party so that they're not having people choosing between going both directions in terms of volunteers, in terms of organizers, in terms of different organizations and nonprofits that they want to be affiliated with. So yeah, exactly. It's like we don't see this level of like antipathy or kind of stubbornness from the people who the NDP is going to actually want to go and like knock doors for them and do all that.
And this whole section of this piece as well is goes back to what I was saying, where this reaction among the NDP leadership in these provinces has provided ammunition for these right-wing cranks to write these kinds of stories, where he's talking now about like one outcome is likely to be a divorce decrees by provincial New Democratic parties in Saskatchewan, BC, and Alberta. Lewis is poison in resource provinces. He makes ex-federal minister Stephen Guilbeault sound like a wildcatter. The Alberta NDP under Naheed Nenshi tried a trial separation. New members can opt out of automatic membership in the federal party. Thousands have done so, including the leader. Despite that, the Alberta NDP is still formally a section of the federal party. The BC and Saskatchewan parties, wholly linked, are stuck with the abuse they'll face on the doorsteps.
BC, I mean, Lewis led fundraising everywhere except for Alberta. So BC, I mean, and David Eby, I think his response was closer to Canoe's than Nenshi's or Beck's, where he was just like, yeah, we don't agree on a lot of things. I have my concerns, but congrats. I'm happy for you. Right. So, yeah, I mean, Braid doesn't know what he's talking about, but I'm wondering, since we're limited for time, if you want to maybe scroll down to Conservatives, of course. Sorry, I'm leading a Passover Seder tomorrow night, so I'm
Conservatives, of course, had a laugh riot watching that convention. A United Conservative Caucus release began Nenshi's new anti-pipeline boss spells trouble for Alberta NDP. It noted that Lewis said he's utterly devoted to Naheed's victory in the next provincial election due in fall 2027. I can't believe he said that. How dare he? Then she can dress up Alberta any way he wants, didn't? But they're now the party of AVI LEWIS. Yeah. At the Winnipeg convention.
Was like, I hope Nenshi loses.
Yeah, yeah. At the Winnipeg convention.
I hope Lewis he die.
Well, I think
I will kill myself and everyone in this room right now. If that's
I think
what
some members of the Alberta NDP caucus would share that sentiment. But, yeah.
Then she can dress up Alberta any way he wants, but they're now the party of AVI LEWIS. At the Winnipeg convention, Lewis's radical prescription was blurred by the party's fixation with equity. Video of members waving their color-coded equity cards prompted hilarity across the internet. There was tens and tens of comments about this. Much of it was laughable.
Why don't you touch grass, Don?
But there was underlying sadness too. Some delegates were truly disadvantaged people just looking for a home, and some understanding. One young man said all the noise was amping up his anxiety. That's a serious condition. Similarly, the trials of many trans people are real.
Many trans people. Some, though.
Yeah.
Some are fake. And I mean, anyways, I won't go off on a tangent now about Braid's views on trans people.
But the NDP handling of all this just creates hostility even among their own. One delegate with an equity card complained that a cis woman had been recognized first, which was not permitted. The display isn't limited to an NDP meeting. It plays out in universities across Canada and beyond. Of course, you got to make that connection with the woke university indoctrination centers. Columnist Chris Selly labeled the convention a faculty lounge takeover of the NDP. He was bang on. But the
Chris
economic
Selly,
agenda
who-
is the deeper danger.
Chris Selly, who knows a lot about the NDP and is definitely operating in good faith.
Our plan is to trump this. Listen to this really dangerous, extreme rhetoric, and I know everyone's
finally
gonna be really
he gets
scared.
to it.
Our plan is to Trump-proof the economy by investing massively in Canadian economic independence, using the unmatched power of public ownership to ensure the fundamentals of a good life. Oh my God. He called for a network of public providers for food, phones, and internet, a public housing developer, and public construction companies to build millions of non-market homes, a 21st century electrical grid, an EV bus revolution, and a heat pump in every home built with Canadian steel, creating tens of thousands of unionized jobs.
Well, we know what he thinks of unionized jobs.
Yeah. No, all this stuff sounds really scary. And it just goes back to what I was saying, that like everyone understands no one likes their telecom company. No one likes being gouged at the grocery store. No one likes being gouged for electricity or energy. And the idea that these proposals are being made, of which the Conservatives have had no fucking answer to, beyond more privatization and more austerity and more social benefit cuts, and they act like proposing these very moderate solutions about some kind of national program to deal with any of these things, is some kind of like extraordinary out of bounds idea. It's just so disconnected from actual reality. Lewis wants virtually the entire economy nationalized, including grocery stores. Toronto has just approved a pilot project for 4 government groceries. Small business owners would see their businesses lost to collectivism. That's not democratic socialism anymore. It's communism. Few people who witness the real thing will want that.
I don't know. A lot of people in Russia in Ukraine who witnessed the real thing seem to think that was better than what they have now.
Yeah. We don't really ever want to talk about
but
that.
I don't know. They weren't a fucking right-wing Calgary Herald columnist who was sent there to write about how scary communism is. So, what do they know? Yeah, no, this is crazy. And this this is also has me nostalgic for Big Shiny Takes, a podcast I think some people in chat might be familiar with. But yeah, no, I mean, the thing that was like Lewis wants virtually the entire economy nationalized. In the paragraph immediately before, Braid quotes Lewis saying a network of public providers, which is not nationalization. And then after he notes that Toronto has 4 government grocery stores. Is that nationalization? Are they taking over private grocery stores? No, they're creating new ones. It's called competition.
Yeah, and just this idea that anything that threatens Galen Weston's massive annual profits is somehow out of bounds. Again, it's just like completely preposterous. This idea that the extreme and radical thing is to have a possible government-owned grocery option. Really, the normal, sensible thing is to allow 3 different families to completely monopolize this entire industry and price gouge people during times of national crisis to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. That's the only way we can do things in this country. We got to do it that way, and anything that's outside of that is just dangerous, scary, threatening communism.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Cam. I've talked way too much.
We're using the equity speakers list, so thank you, Jeremy.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But
I'm so brainwashed that.
Exactly. But I was gonna say it speaks to maybe it was your point earlier, Rob, that like they're gonna say the same thing, no matter how moderated your policies are. They're going to say that you hate oil and gas if you're in the prairies and you say anything other than like we should be dependent on gas for the next 100 years. So why not at least say something that doesn't pre-compromise to that and that it attempts to carve out its own space? And I think here we do see that Lewis is ultimately only a social democrat. Like, this column almost makes the opposite point that it sets out to, because it spends all this time to gin up this kind of specter of Lewis, the specter haunting Canada of Lewis as this communist firebrand, and then it's like it's underwhelming almost. It's like, well, there will be a public option. It's this kind of like very prudent, like experimental kind of version of this idea of having public ownership, rather than like, yeah, we're going to take over TELUS, we're going to take over Rogers. Like, rich people should not be controlling essential infrastructure and these
I would
kinds
be
of things.
thrilled if that's what we were doing, but like that's not what we are doing. No, that's the thing.
I would personally like it a lot.
Yeah. Guys, do you have any final thoughts? It's been a really great conversation. It's gone quite longer than kind of what I was anticipating, but it's been a real pleasure to have you both on here to talk about this, talk about Avi Lewis's campaign and the convention and what this means for the progressive movement in Canada. It's been fantastic. You have any final thoughts before we say goodbye? Jeremy.
No, this is an interesting, I think, experiment, again, infusing sort of movement politics with electoral politics in a way that I don't think we've seen succeed in Canada, in part due to the sort of elder Lewis's involvement in shutting it down. But and that's not a dig at Avi. He's not his dad or granddad, yeah, it will be at the very least interesting to watch. And I was talking to Desmond Cole. This is what I'll leave people with, and then I will let him speak again. Is I was talking to Desmond Cole at Lewis's victory party, and I was, telling him sort of my feelings about not wanting to be a partisan, and to be able to hold Lewis to account while also to be happy that this happened. And he was like, Desmond was like, no, this is good. What just happened? Like, we should be happy. This is a victory. And maybe it won't work. But the only way to find out whether it works or not is for something like this to happen. So I leave on that note of cautious optimism.
Yeah, I think that very similarly, it's interesting. I think that I think that there is always a fair case that, like, you should you should never put yourself at risk of being burned yet again by the NDP.
Yeah.
But I think with
or
that
progressive electoralism in general.
Exactly. Like, I think it is nevertheless probably at least one less headache to deal with than having to try to manage relationships and lack of support, et cetera, from the ostensibly Social Democratic Party. As I said before, it can be rhetorically useful to have. I mean, at the end of the day, this is Lewis's primary case, is that he is a good communicator of policy. I don't think he has the kind of charisma of Leighton or even of Singh in terms of like personal charisma, likability. He does come off maybe as glib sometimes or as overly written. I'm sure he'll improve that as he continues his career as a politician, but he has been consistently good at explaining his policies, at dispelling criticisms of those policies, at generally at not taking the bait, at not kind of capitulating to these bad faith interpretations, at reframing them and pivoting. Even as he did with some of these internal conflicts. So I think that is the. I'm more willing to be excited about that, about the next few years of less fighting against the NDP, hopefully, and of better representation of left politics in mainstream Canadian discourse. I think that is appealing, and that is what will potentially create fertile ground during that time. And I think it's also good that Lewis recognizes the need to rebuild the party. recognizes that it will be a multi-year struggle. Quickly, I should mention something he said in the speech, which was that his grandfather, and he has kind of had to try and figure out a way to not kind of receive the Nepo baby allegations. The Nepo husband allegations he's fine with, but you don't want to seem dynastic in the way that Trudeau did. And I think that the way he ultimately managed that in his victory speech was presenting it as kind of an arc of history type of thing, where he said, my dad, he kind of confessed or acknowledged, I should say, that his dad was in hospital and not doing well, but had been following the campaign. And he said, my dad told me that his father told him, so David Lewis, that would be, we won't see social democracy in my lifetime, but maybe in yours. And then Stephen Lewis told AVI, we won't see it in my lifetime, but maybe in yours. And then the big kind of pop that Lewis got during his speech, which he carried through the momentum to the end, and people were, chanting AVI, AVI, and NDP, NDP, and he actually really had the crowd, the room going at this point, was he was saying, I refuse to say that to my kid. We will see it in my lifetime. We will see these things in my lifetime. And then he goes on to list them. And so I think that there's this balance of urgency and patience that is probably going to be productive in this moment where carnyism is so ascendant. But people also have so much despair and confusion. There's this idea that we have to win this time. We have to advance left politics in some form in this moment, but that the NDP specifically as an organization needs to regain trust, needs to rebuild its capacity, and needs to take a patient approach to campaigning over the course of years rather than just during election cycles to advance its policies. Lewis's case, which again, it's fair to never want to be burned by trusting the NDP, but his case is that trust will come to the NDP because he will make them, and they will be the party willing to diagnose the problems honestly, and the problem being capitalism, the problem being dominance of the 1%. And his hope and his case is that will ultimately win the allegiance of the masses. I don't know if the NDP will accomplish something like that. I don't know if what they would accomplish is something that can even come close to resolving any of these contradictions, or that we would ultimately be excited about. But I think that project of bringing that case to the Canadian public is one that is we're all swimming roughly that direction. And there's been so much going the other direction in terms of rhetorically and how people think and how people feel about immigrants and pipelines and all these issues that we've seen. That what excites me is the potential to have messaging that is better and stronger and more widespread than we unfortunately have had over the past basically decade now.
Absolutely. No, that was a really nice ending to the speech. I did think it was undercut slightly then when someone brought a Canadian flag on stage and AVI Lewis tore it up and threw it on the ground and went and spat on it and stamped on it and said, I hate Canada, actually.
Yeah,
that I was sympathetic to some of that, but at the same time I was like, maybe this is a little bit too much for some of the people we're trying to bring into this movement. But again,
yeah, and I was surprised. I was surprised by the Hezbollah flag.
Yeah, that was
on stage too. I think we've
surprising.
got the thing is on the left. We need a.
It's a big tent though, when you think about it.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Satire, by the way, satire.
Yeah. Well, but and the thing we're referencing is that there were surprisingly and encouragingly, there was a Palestine flag on stage when Avi brought everyone up when he was declared the winner. There was a Venezuela flag.
It was I was actually that's why I tweeted, but I was actually corrected by Martin Lukash. It was a Colombian flag.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, it was a Colombian flag.
Which is weirder.
Yeah.
He was like, I don't know, I got
it. Yeah. But so, because we were wondering, like, how far would the flags go? Like, would an Iran flag, Hezbollah flag, Hamas flag?
Well, that's obviously a reference to the narco-trafficking terrorists that were funding the campaign that no one wants to talk about.
True.
Yeah.
That's true. If you look at the fundraising, it's really weird because it shows all the provinces, and he leads in all of them, except for Alberta. But then there's in Colombia, Nicaragua,
Yeah.
El Salvador.
Very
If
curious.
you go country by country, it's 100% Lewis. It's,
Okay.
he's gonna have to answer some questions.
I'm thinking about like the Jeb map with like all these like Latin American
they'll say,
countries.
the Jeb map.
I was the whole convention. I was like, it's gonna be Tony's day. You watch.
Yeah. Anyway, I really appreciate both of you two for coming on the show. It's been such a long conversation. Thanks for sticking it out this whole time. But it was really great to talk to both of you. So thanks again. You're both welcome to come on anytime you like. So hope to talk to you again soon. And thank you again.
I can keep going.
I have to leave. I got to go pick up my kid from school.
Yeah.
I know you can keep going. Yeah.
Free Palestine. Let's fucking go. Let's see how this shakes out, and let's be skeptical but hopeful.
That's pretty reasonable. Absolutely. Well, thank you to you both. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.